Welcome. We're so glad that you could join us today. We have a couple more folks filtering in and connecting. So my name is Betsy Lazega. I'm with the Florida PBIS project. And you guys are really in for a treat today because you have quite a few of us joining you to help with this meeting. And what we'll be talking about today is enhancing Tier 1 for all students, really focusing in on those stakeholders and how we can achieve more voice from our stakeholders. Today, your presenters are going to be Dr. Stephanie Martinez, Dr. Teresa Sandomirsky, and Robin Vanover, all from our project. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. And I will start. Is it Stephanie?
Yeah, sure. Thanks,
Awesome.
Betsy.
You're
So
welcome.
we are starting today. I know that Teresa quickly showed you the Zoom expectations for today. So just be kind, have integrity, and be respectful. Throughout, we're doing something a little bit different today. We're going to be doing some breakout rooms as part of this. And so we're going to have some small groups and having the opportunity to interact and chat today, which is a little bit different than our TA chats. So next. So if you wouldn't mind in the chat box, if you would please indicate which district you are from. And if you want to put in what your role is in the district. And if you want to do something a little bit fun, we were discussing before we got started today about Christmas or holiday decorations. So if you are pro holiday decorations before Thanksgiving, that includes music as well. If you want to put a yes or an emoji to describe how you feel, or if you're like, that waits until after Thanksgiving, feel free to do that too, as well, just as a little fun thing. When you were in the waiting room, I'm going to talk for a minute while you start writing in the chat box. While you were in the waiting room, Betsy had put in a link for today's handouts. So you can access those, and she'll be putting that again in a second. So to get started, we do have someone from Minnesota. Thank you. She's the regional coordinator. She's going to be decorating this weekend. We have Erica from Duval. Teresa's after Thanksgiving. Kara from Clay County, as soon as possible after Thanksgiving. Michael from Palm Beach County after Thanksgiving. Sarah from SEDNet, pro early. Robin says after Thanksgiving. Brooke says bring on the tinsel. Kelly from Hernando County says she doesn't really have an opinion. Do what makes you happy. Catherine from St. Lucie said this weekend, and Lauren from our project said after Thanksgiving for sure. So it seems like we had a pretty good mixture of people, maybe more a little bit after Thanksgiving. We've got Collier County represented, Pinellas County represented, Broward County represented. So good mixture of people. Thank you. Go to the next slide, Therese. Okay, so this is our chat for today. It's going to be talking about enhancing Tier 1 implementation for all students. So here are our 3 objectives for today. I'm not going to read them to you, but these are what we hope you get out of the chat from today. Some different ideas about including the voice of stakeholders, specifically students. And we're going to have the opportunity to practice a resource from the center from PBIS. On ways to include student voice in some different of the Tier 1 components of PBIS. Next. So when we're thinking about that, we are talking about the critical elements on the benchmarks of quality, but we really want to think about what we include and why we include stakeholder voice. So we do want to include our staff, definitely. We do want to include families and students, but we really are going to focus today a lot on students and including all students in that. So why do we do it? When we think about schools, we think about education, we think who are the consumers? Our students, right? And especially as they start to get older, they definitely have opinions and thoughts about the school and the setting. I had a great conversation about that this morning with middle schools and high schools. But developmentally, when they start to get to that adolescent age, they look more to peer than to the adults on campus. So they want to have increased ownership and leadership on what takes place on campus. The other thing that we sometimes don't think about is that students have a different perspective than we do of different things on campus. And so they may have some insights that we don't have. And because they have those different insights, they may have some very different ideas of what can be done. So for example, we were working with students in one district and we showed them their discipline data, and hallway was one of the areas of need. And when we talked to the students, they said it wasn't all hallways. They identified 2 specific hallways. One was one stairwell where there was not adult supervision, so the stairwell get clogged because they knew there wasn't anybody there. And so their recommendation was they wanted an adult at the top of the stairs, at the bottom of the stairs, just to say, keep moving, and getting the students to keep moving. The second place they identified was in front of a soda machine. And they said what happened was people would hang out with no intent of actually buying a soda. But then those who were trying to buy couldn't get to it. So they just wanted an adult there to keep kind of like that line moving. And if you're not buying something, then move out of the way. So very simple solutions of placement of adult supervision that we got from the students. And so that's really why we want to do it. And then the last thing, which we talked about with some high schools and middle schools earlier today, is building those positive relationships, because they will take on some different leadership roles. They'll feel like their voices have been heard, and they've made some changes on their campus, and it helps to connect them with the adults on campus. Next. So again, I said, who are the stakeholder groups? We're really going to be focusing on students today, but really everybody should be involved. And so you can see all the different stakeholders that we would include on that. And I think sometimes we forget about those people that are not on our campus at all times. So those itinerant staff or special ed staff who come and go, maybe our social worker, school psychologist, if you have a teacher of deaf and blind. So all individuals on campus. And then if you have any community agencies or partners that spend time on your campus as well, getting their involvement. Next. So on this slide, there are several different examples of what some schools have done for collaboration with families and students. I'm going to point out the one that I really thought was the coolest idea. Was there was a high school, so it's the third example down, that had a student leadership course. And this student leadership course had representation from all grade levels, all types of students. So those who were involved with drama, band, sports, those not involved at all with school, across race and ethnicity. And they were giving input about things around PBIS. One of the juniors was like, well, we do have a very diverse group, but we're limiting the voice to just those people in that one leadership course. And he said, we really need to have voice for more students. So he paired up actually with a freshman, because when he left, he wanted it to continue. They took a tour of campus, found the areas that had the highest traffic patterns. They put up QR codes. And so attached to every QR code was a Google form. And on that form, they rotated different questions. And so like every 2 weeks, they would post a new question. They would tell students in the morning announcements, we have these questions posted, we want to hear from you. Students would have the opportunity to scan the QR code, type in their answers. Then the leadership course would get those responses back. They would kind of sift through them. And then they met with the school PBIS and administration team and said, this is what our students are saying. And so you can see that little yellow box right there. That was one of their first questions that they used. So again, there's lots of different ways. That's probably my favorite one, because it was actually identified by the student on how they wanted to obtain everybody's voice and not just those in that specific class. So I'm going to turn it over now to Robin Vanover.
Thank you, Stephanie. So today is a unique TA chat, in that we're going to be actually using some of the resources that we're introducing to you today. And so if you've not done so already, we would like for you to download the PBIS Culturally Responsive Field Guide. It is a resource for trainers and coaches. And this is from and published on the Center for PBIS. And so you have the QR code and the bit.ly. And I want to just quickly recognize the authors of the guide, because it's really an important guide that was published. I think it hit around March of 2021. And, you know, oftentimes there's so many things that get published that we don't really stop and read or recognize some of those tools and resources that are out there that can really help support our work with PBIS. So, so the authors include Melanie Leverson, Kent Smith, Kent McIntosh, Jennifer Rose, and Sarah Pinkelman. And within this guide, which we're going to be using today, there are 5 core components or features to this guide to help guide our work, essentially. It centers around identity, having voice, a supportive environment, and situational appropriateness, and data for equity. We're not going to go into all 5 of those core components today. We'll leave that for you and your PBIS teams to explore, your district core personnel to explore, but we are, like Stephanie mentioned, going to be focusing on voice. So the next slide, please. So we're going to give you an opportunity to chat in the chat box and tell us a little bit about how your district or schools provide opportunities for voices to be heard. And they might be a variety of different ways that Stephanie just reviewed, but family and community engagement is really important. And it is one of those items on the benchmark of quality that sometimes schools will score themselves a little bit low because they're not quite sure how they're reaching out, or they feel like they could reach out a little bit better. So go ahead in the chat box and identify some of the ways in which your district reaches out to family. So what are those ways in which your schools solicit those voices? So ESC advisory council meetings, parent focus groups. Our schools encourage students, business partners to be members on the PBS team. Great idea, Michael. Aaron, parent-teacher organization, okay? Anyone else? Go ahead, I'll wait a couple more minutes. No, not minutes, seconds. School advisory committee, another good one, Kara, thank you. Zach, yes, thank you. Erica? Students and staff, tell me more about that. Surveys or focus groups, or if you're able and you want to expand on that a little bit, go right ahead. So there's a variety of different ways. One of the things that you're going to learn as we go through the guide today are some other kinds of resources that maybe you could explore in order to find new ways. Sometimes what we experience, just like leadership groups, we kind of tap into the same voices over and over again. And sometimes we experience that with our SACs, our PTOs, et cetera. And there was some expansion on that response. Surveys, verbal feedback, and input. So great, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. So students and families should see themselves as they're represented throughout the school. So one of the things, not only do we listen to our stakeholders, like our families and our students and our teachers, but there should be some visuals around the school. So when I walk through a school, is it representative of the population and all of the cultures that are attending that school? So next slide, please. So again, if you've not already downloaded the copy, yep, nope, you're right. We're showing it again, Therese. Very good. We're showing it one more time. We'd like for you to make sure that you have accessed the CR Field Guide and that you have that within your reach. There's also an activity that you can download as well, and an additional resource. Next slide. So what we're going to do today, and this is going to be fun, and hopefully our technology will work properly today, but we're going to actually send you to some breakout rooms. So you're going to a random breakout room in which there's going to be some topics there. Our FLPBIS staff will be there as well to help support you and answer any questions that you might have. But we're going to use the guide, and there's an activity sheet. So if you have those readily available, we'd like, once you get into that room, we'd like for maybe someone to volunteer to take those notes. You're going to be looking at different sections that speak to voice. So you're going to be looking at some sections that deal with behavioral expectations and teaching of those expectations. And that's going to be led by Stephanie, and I believe Brooke might be stepping into that room as well. The next room is 1.5 problem behavior definitions, and 1.6 discipline policies, and Therese and Brian will be in that room. And 1.8 is classroom procedures. Lauren and Kat will be there. And the last student, family, community involvement. Myself and Karen will be in that room. So when you open up your guide, you're going to see an introduction. You're also going to see a deeper explanation of those core components. And then you're going to look for your section that you fell into the room with. And hopefully keep your fingers crossed this is going to work. You're going to see an expansion of that broad overview of that topic, a description. You're going to see some examples, some non-examples. You're going to also see some linked tools and resources. So what we would like for you to do on the activity sheet is identify 2 examples that you think you will use in your district or in your school. There's going to be a resource that you select or a tool that you recommend and why. And then if there is a question that you might have, so one question that you still have lingering, and it might be something that you're unclear of, it might be a question to further expand your knowledge about, or where you might find additional tools or resources, any question that you might have. So that is our activity in a nutshell. Unpacking that guide. We're going to toss you into a breakout room. You're going to have those topics, have 20 minutes to explore that topic, identify a key spokesperson from your group. And when we come back, we expect that there's going to be some sharing so that we all get a pretty good idea of what you all were able to explore and what you learned. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Betsy because I
Yes,
believe.
ma'am. Okay, I'll go ahead and open up the rooms,
Yep, you're going
and
to go.
I'll give you a warning when you're running out of time.
Oh, that'll be great. Will we see the countdown, the clock?
Yeah, and you'll get a message from me, 5 minute and then a 1 minute. All right,
Perfect.
so I'll go ahead and open the rooms, fingers crossed. Yay, it looks like everyone made it back.
We sure did. And like the timing was impeccable.
Oh, awesome. That's perfect. I was in the dark. I wasn't sure. Oh, there's my timer. Okay. I'll hand it back over to you guys.
Love that timer. All right. So I really appreciate the conversation we had in our group. And I'm also really, really curious about the conversations from other groups. So if y'all don't mind, let's start and just do them chronologically. And so folks who were with Stephanie looking at behavioral expectations and teaching expectations, who volunteered to share out the 2 examples, 1 resource, and 1 question?
Since we were running out of time, Therese, I had been taking notes. So I said, I'll just do it since we were running out of time. But we have the 2 ones about behavioral expectations and then teaching them. And so we had I think it was a great discussion about when developing the behavioral expectations. The example that we really liked was that families and students are given opportunities to examine and give feedback on the school-wide expectations and rules before implementing them, and at least annually after implementation. And we had Belinda with us from Naples, and she gave us a great example this year that the dress code was not posted before school started. And parents went out and bought clothing and stuff, and then it didn't match the dress code after school had started. And they said, it would have been good if we'd had that beforehand and if we'd been able to have some input in that before it was decided. And she said if they had done some of that, then maybe it would have eliminated some of the issues they've had this year. So I thought that was a really good example of not only students, but also families. And then I shared that a colleague of ours in another state has a student advisory board that helps with the development of the student code of conduct every year. And they get the opportunity to provide feedback.
Nice.
Then the second area we had was teaching expectations and rules. And there were several examples in there, but I think the one that we really liked the most was teams examine expectations for reflection of dominant cultural values that may need explicit teaching, and if found, to find the logical rationale for those expectations and a plan for explicitly teaching it to all students. And so we had, again, a good discussion about the term respect and how that may look different for different students and different cultures. And again, Belinda gave the example of questioning and talking to students about the term respect and got a different interpretation of voice volume with respect. And then after hearing one student's interpretation, went asked some other students and got some eye-opening that the students were all in the same kind of boat about what that was, which was different than her as the adult. What we also found in the teaching expectation section is that a lot of the examples were really aligned well together. So it's kind of like you do one and then you do the other, then you do the other. So then we thought, okay, how do we then teach those expectations once we do them? What we decided is we went and looked at the resources that were available, and the one that we actually would recommend is Appendix G. It's called the Personal Matrix Activity. And it's where the students come together and identify what the expectations look like at school, with friends, and at home. And then we talked about, you can even add another column on there that says community as well. And we talked about that there is a blank one that you can use. There is also a filled out one as a sample. And then there is a lesson plan. So yeah, that's what Teresa's showing right now. And then there's a lesson plan. So if you keep going down, there's a lesson plan for it. And we really like that. So we talked about how Belinda's at a really large high school. And so getting a subset of students to go through that activity. And I shared that there is a high school in California that we did a conference presentation with once. And they actually do that every 4 years, the personal matrix activity with the entire school, because they want that current class of students to be represented in that matrix. And they did it the first time, and they didn't do it for many years until the students said, when was the last time this was done? And it had been 6 or 7 years. And the students said, we're not represented in that. We want to be represented. So now they make sure, because of the turnover every 4 years, at a minimum, they do it every 4 years to get the student's voice in it.
That's fantastic.
And we ran out of time, so we didn't really have a question.
That's good. Awesome. Well, Stephanie, thank you very much for sharing that. Our next group here is actually the group that was with myself and Brian. And Kelly, would you still be willing to share our notes from that discussion? And Kelly may not be able to get back to her microphone. Give one more second or two. Okay. So Kelly, I'll go ahead and jump in, and Desiree and Erica. Oh, Kelly, you're back.
Sorry. Sorry. Okay, so let me pull up that slide. Okay, so for our two examples, our first one was the teams actively seek consensus among staff with responses to problem behavior by revisiting and practicing the procedures at least annually, or as data indicates, which I really liked in that one because it also indicates that they're reviewing data frequently. And then also we said, for an example, teams work with school staff to develop categories for behaviors that include staff managed, office managed, and situationally inappropriate behaviors. So with that one, there was a resource that they provided to be able to work on redefining problem behaviors called the pie chart, which we also talked about, but we really liked all the resources that were provided in the guide. So picking one was very hard, but there was a great resource that aligned with those examples.
Mhm.
And then our question, I was the only one that had a question, and it was really about like, where do we begin this work? Because when I was reading what is in that guide, I really felt like my district, although wants to do all of these things, like I know they were just asking about doing a restorative practice training. And I was like, but I don't know if we're really there yet, because I feel like we're kind of missing this foundational piece of the culturally responsiveness to address that preventative before we have to even look at restoring those issues after the fact. So this is, I feel like, that foundation that we're looking for to begin with. And I just wanted to know, like, where do we get started? So
Does anyone want to weigh in on that question or the resources?
Pat, Lauren, you guys know my schools.
I was just going to write in the chat. Yeah, Kelly, you're right.
Awesome. Kelly, thank you for summarizing our discussion. I appreciate that. Okay, so I will go ahead and take us next to section 1.8. So that was Lauren and Kat, the classroom procedures.
Yes, so I'm going to share for our group. So let me just get our notes up here real quick. Let me share. That will work. Even better. Thank you, Therese. Okay, you all should be able to see this now. Hopefully it's big enough. So we are the classroom group and thought through two of our examples here. So the first one was encouraging students to share from their culture. And an example of that, I think it was the second one down on that list. We had lots of discussion around what this might look like. So some of our folks shared doing this through music. So students selecting their music, their culturally background, relevant and supportive classroom library, and the use of art and digital technology. One of the folks shared that their school is doing a commitment to character and PBIS through culture, and they're doing a project-based learning, which is going to go into a school-wide showcase, which was really unique and a cool idea to bring that about for everyone to see and have a conversation around. And then the other example was teachers posting images of successful persons from underrepresented groups filling professional roles, such as counter stereotypical imaging in the classroom. And this to help us see and reflect the image and demographic of the classroom. So Michael actually shared, I think before we went from the breakout groups, one of the examples that they all do, that if you go into a classroom, an empty classroom, you should just be able to see the culture of that classroom without any students around based on what is being projected and provided in the classroom. The non-example that we kind of highlighted and stood out to us was the behavioral errors due to those cultural differences that are often met with punishment. So we often see that they don't always align with perhaps the teacher in the classroom. And so then there becomes a lot of those behavioral errors as well. The resource we want to highlight that it was actually Appendix E. So that's examples of cultural imaging of students and families, because schools can really do this fairly easily and provide a lot more feedback than sometimes we get from surveys, especially if we have students be able to turn this back in, have that conversation. So we also can really help our staff to see many different pieces of culture so that it's not just that one kind of stereotypical piece that we think of as culture for our students, but see that there are so many more layers. And this past question was kind of more of letting us know that the assessment measure that was provided there was not available to access. It was a dead link. So we'll want to look at that. And that's it, I think. So if Kat or Michael or Aaron or Edney have anything else to share from our group, please do so.
I think the only thing I would add is what the last group said. A lot of the resources, especially Michael, who had to chat. So again, thank you, Michael, for participating that way. Were mentioned outside of the classroom resources section in our little section of the guide. So a lot of resources were helpful, even if they weren't mentioned there. So we highlighted the ones from our section, but like the routine matrix of looking at how things look across settings was one that we talked about. So I just think that's a consistent theme from the last group. A lot of the resources are helpful, even if they weren't noted specifically in classroom. That's it. That's all I would add. You did a great job, Lauren. Otherwise, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Yes. Oh, you can hear me, can't you? Okay. That's good. Would anyone else from your group like to add anything to that discussion? Or do others have a question or reaction based on what was shared? Okay, then I will move on.
Therese, sorry, I was trying for my mute button. I don't know if people read the note, because I know one of the things that they were talking about were books and literature that are representative of students.
Yeah.
And if you haven't looked at the Sunshine State Reader book list, the last 2 years has been awesome to make sure that the characters in the book represent all of the students. So if you're looking for some new ones, Planet Earth is Blue is a good one. It includes a student with a disability. Black Brother is one from this year that was amazing as well. There's Cat and Pillar. It was a great one last year that was ethnic diversity too. So great books, just a resource out there if you're looking for some for your, I can't speak to all of them. I know 3 through 5 specifically have that representation.
That's awesome. And if you're looking for ideas and actual people, like people from history to share, you can find these, and I guess you can't really see them. They're Black History flashcards. They're made by urban intellectuals. And it's literally a flashcard. On one side, you've got pictures of different Black intellectuals, and on the back, they describe their contributions. So that can be a handy shortcut if you're not sure where to start to identify role models from history. Okay, so last but not least, we've got Robin and Karen's group on student, family, and community involvement.
All right, and I will share out for that group. So one example that our group discussed was teams actively seek feedback from stakeholders regarding their perceptions of and suggestions for Tier 1 SWPBIS systems, at least annually. And our group added on to that to say, there was actually one of our group members who said that they have done this recently, and they wanted to gear it specifically to their teachers and how the PBIS could be updated based on their feedback. She also made sure to clarify the mission and the vision during that conversation. And they went back and kind of reviewed incentives and updated what was being offered to the students to make it a little more engaging and motivating. So it was nice to hear that one just in use, a good example of it being in use. Another example was teams have procedures for specific community outreach actions to ensure frequent two-way communication with stakeholders. So I think the consensus was, we'd love to see more community outreach. One great suggestion that was brought up was QR codes being posted in common community gathering areas. So one of our members in our group lives in a very rural area. And so she was saying it's a little bit difficult to kind of get that outreach sometimes. So that QR code being posted, say, in a grocery store where most of those parents will end up was offered up as a possible suggestion. We looked through the resources that were on there. They are great resources, but we talked a little bit more about I guess I don't think that it's on there necessarily, but connecting with the parent involvement person who handles Title I within each of those counties and leveraging and connecting them or with them in order to allow us to achieve that common goal. And so again, somebody gave an example of how they're doing that. So there's a Title I parent involvement requirement that there are certain events throughout the year, and the parents have to have some sort of a takeaway from that event to report back on. And they said that they would focus that takeaway on PBIS. And then our question as a group was, how can we get more stakeholder involvement?
Nice. Sarah, thank you very much for summarizing that. Any questions or comments from your group or from others listening to the summary?
Therese, can I share one idea that it made me think of when Sarah's talking about rural? There was a district, I don't actually follow through with it, but their idea was they were trying to get lots of surveys from families. And there's one facility in the area where a lot of the families worked. So they were putting in the survey. They were going to work with that facility to put the survey in with the paychecks. And in that community, when people got paid, they went to the McDonald's. So in addition to having the survey, they had a coupon. If you came on that day and you turned the survey and you got some free McDonald's, and then someone from the school was going to be there to collect them, because that was just what happened in that district. So I thought that was a really unique way of tapping in, especially with a rural district, of the community and resources and trying to get some input that way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. Other ideas, comments, suggestions, questions? Okay. Well, you all did a great job of sharing information back from the different parts of the guide. I hope that the time we spent here together today was useful for you. I certainly enjoyed the opportunity to go back through the guide and hear how you guys are thinking about the information and potentially planning on using that information. So thank you for that. Betsy does have a couple of poll questions for our group. Betsy, are you able to put those up for everyone right now?
Yes, hopefully you see them on your screen. I just launched them. There's just a few questions there. We would greatly appreciate it if you could just give us a little bit of feedback. We are a grant funded project, and this also really helps us to figure out what you guys are interested in hearing more about. So we really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you guys for summarizing, because I was in this dark room while you all were talking. So it was really nice to get a little summary of what everyone was talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was really curious as to what all happened in the other groups too, but I really enjoyed our conversation. So I enjoyed my time. So there's that. All right, so then we have additional webinars scheduled every month. You guys can access those a couple of ways. If you go first to our website, flpbis.org, you can scroll down to the PBIS chat schedule pod, which is down towards the bottom of the screen. Just click on the training binder or the binder for this year's online chats, and the schedule's the first thing you see in there. You can also follow us on social media. If you follow us on Facebook, you can also follow us on Twitter. We have accounts on those two platforms, and we always post out. Yeah, we create a Facebook event, and we offer reminders and registration links through social media. So those are a couple of different places that you can access that information. Beyond that, you've got our contact information and resources for the National Center, as well as the professional organization for PBS as the general field. And if there's nothing else, I hope everyone has a really good afternoon, and I hope everyone has a phenomenal Thanksgiving break. We could all use some time off. So go ahead, enjoy that, and come back refreshed. So thank you for your time.